Ava Hawthorne stood on the balcony of her penthouse suite, the glittering skyline of Manhattan stretching out before her like an endless sea of lights. From this height, everything seemed so small, distant and manageable, just the way she liked it. The view was breathtaking, the kind of view only someone with her status could afford. But as she stared out over the city, she felt an emptiness that even the most opulent surroundings couldn't fill. She tugged at the hem of her black silk dress, the fabric cool against her skin as the late evening breeze tousled her chestnut brown hair. The city was alive below her, a world that pulsed with energy, yet here, high above it all, she felt utterly alone. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. Without looking at the screen, she already knew who it was. Miranda, her older sister, the ever-present force in Ava's life. The one who pushed, prodded, and made sure Ava never strayed from the path of ambition. The one who would never, ever let her forget that family and business were her duty, not the whims of personal desire. Ava sighed, sliding her finger across the glass screen and raising the phone to her ear. "Yes, Miranda?" "Ava, where are you? The board meeting starts in an hour." Miranda's voice was sharp, the usual mixture of concern and control. "I'm not sure why you insist on doing everything from a distance. You're a CEO, not a phantom." Ava's lips tightened. She had heard this before, countless times. The board meeting, the constant demands to increase the company's valuation, the expectations that she would keep leading the way she always had, relentless, flawless, unmoving. She had spent years crafting her reputation as the woman who never faltered, the brilliant mind behind the multi-billion-dollar tech empire. But it came at a cost. Miranda knew it, her colleagues knew it, and somehow, even the city of New York seemed to know it. "I'll be there," Ava said, keeping her voice calm. "Just need a few more minutes." Miranda didn't need more than a pause to know that Ava wasn't entirely listening. "I just don't understand, Ava. You're letting this personal business, whatever it is, distract you. You need to focus on the company, not whatever you're wasting time with. We've built something great, but you're acting like it's going to disappear if you take one night off." Ava closed her eyes, letting her sister's words wash over her like the distant hum of the city. It was hard to explain that, for her, it was never about the company. Not anymore. The company had grown into something beyond her control, a towering structure that was both a source of pride and suffocating weight. Every corner of her life was meticulously crafted, every decision calculated, yet the ache in her chest never seemed to go away. "Miranda, I'll handle it," she said, her voice sharper now. "Let me go." Before her sister could respond, Ava ended the call, pressing the phone back into her clutch and walking briskly back into her apartment. The walls of glass reflected her image as she moved. A perfect silhouette against the city lights, poised and composed, but with eyes that revealed the exhaustion she never let others see. She set her clutch on the marble countertop and glanced at the time. Another 5 minutes. Then she'd change, prepare, and become the woman everyone expected her to be. Strong, invincible, unbothered. But as her reflection stared back at her, she felt the familiar pang of loneliness. It wasn't that she didn't have people around her. She had an entire staff of assistants, publicists, and even a circle of socialites who admired her success. But all of them seemed like distant figures in a play that was set on autopilot. They admired her, yes. They sought her approval, yes. But they didn't see the cracks that had begun to form underneath the polished surface of her life. Her gaze shifted to the window once more. The city's lights were beautiful from up here, but they only reminded her that she was miles away from the real connection she craved. It wasn't the glamour of the galas or the high-profile business deals that left her yearning for more. It was the intimacy. The one thing her wealth, her title, and her business acumen could never buy. She longed for something simple, someone who would see her as more than just the CEO of Hawthorne Technologies, someone who wouldn't care about her net worth or her public persona, someone who wouldn't see her as a business transaction. A bitter laugh escaped her lips as she shook her head. In this city, in her world, who would even think to look beyond the wealth, the power, the image? She moved toward her closet, her heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. She grabbed her dress from the hanger, a sleeveless, elegant gown of midnight blue, and slipped it over her head. It fit perfectly, as always. Everything in her life fit perfectly. At least that's what she told herself. A perfectly constructed empire, a perfectly curated existence. Yet here, in the solitude of her penthouse, she was beginning to feel the weight of it all. As she adjusted her earrings and checked her reflection in the mirror, she realized she was no closer to understanding what she truly needed. Maybe it wasn't just about love. Maybe it was about trusting someone to see the real her, beneath the layers of perfection and expectation. But how could she trust anyone when the only people who ever seemed to matter were those who wanted something from her? She walked toward the door, her hand on the polished brass handle, ready to step back into the world where she was untouchable, where her worth was measured by her power. But for just a moment, as she paused in the doorway, she wondered, if she let down her guard, would she find someone who could truly see her? The question lingered as she stepped into the night, the door closing softly behind her, leaving only the city, her reflection, and the silent ache of longing that she would carry with her into the chaos of the world she had created. Ava Hawthorne had always prided herself on control. It was the one thing she could depend on in her world, a world where the glitter of Manhattan's skyline never dulled and the clink of champagne glasses never ceased. As the CEO of Hawthorne Technologies, she had shaped her empire from the ground up, using her mind as her greatest weapon. Everything else, friends, family, even love, had become secondary. In a life where power was the currency, vulnerability was an expensive luxury she couldn't afford. Tonight, though, something felt different. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Opera House, an event as extravagant as the city itself. The sparkling chandeliers and velvety crimson curtains were backdrop to the type of mingling that Ava had long since perfected, poised, polished, and precisely measured. She floated from one influential figure to the next, each greeting a calculated transaction. She wasn't just a woman in the room. She was the room. But as the evening progressed, an unease started to settle beneath her skin. It wasn't something she could place right away. Perhaps it was the pressure of constant expectations, the weight of her family's unspoken demands. Or maybe it was the whispers she'd overheard as she passed through the crowd. The talk was all about her, but not in the way it used to be. There was something, no, someone, pushing her to the brink. Her mind raced. She couldn't put a finger on it, but the sense of being trapped in her own success, isolated by it, became overwhelming. Ava had learned the hard way that being at the top meant having few, if any, true connections. The people around her wanted something, an edge in their business, an introduction to the right person, a share of her wealth or influence. In return, she offered her brilliance, her endless drive, and her capacity for ruthless decision-making. But what was left for her in that exchange? Loneliness. It sat beside her like a shadow, and tonight it felt closer than ever. She excused herself from a conversation with a potential investor, her champagne glass held firmly in hand, and made her way to the edge of the ballroom. The darkened corridor leading to the bathrooms was quiet, a welcome reprieve from the clamor of high society. Ava leaned against the cool marble wall, taking a deep breath, trying to push away the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. That's when it hit her. A sudden rush of dizziness. Her head spun, the edges of her vision darkening like the curtain of an impending storm. Her hand, still clutching the champagne glass, slipped as she staggered back against the wall. The glass shattered on the floor, scattering shards of crystal across the polished marble. Ava didn't even flinch. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed, her vision going completely black. When Ava came to, the first thing she noticed was the sterile scent of antiseptic filling the air. The hum of machines beeped rhythmically, and faint voices echoed in the distance. She tried to move but found herself confined, a soft pressure on her wrist. An IV, the needle pulling painfully against her skin. Panic flared in her chest as she fought to sit up, but a hand gently pushed her back down. She looked up, blinking rapidly against the harsh light. The face above her was unfamiliar, yet there was something oddly comforting about it. A man in scrubs, with calm brown eyes and a reassuring smile. "You're in the emergency room, Ms. Hawthorne," he said, his voice smooth but firm, cutting through her disoriented fog. "You collapsed at the gala. We're taking care of you." Ava frowned, her mind struggling to piece things together. The gala? What had happened? Why was she here, of all places? She looked down at herself, noticing the pale blue hospital gown she was now wearing. She was still alive, which for a moment hadn't seemed like a certainty. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice coming out weaker than she expected. "My name is Liam Foster," the nurse replied, offering a small smile. "I'm one of the ER nurses here. We've been monitoring your vitals. You had a pretty bad reaction, but you're stable now." Ava's heart beat faster as she processed his words. A reaction? A feeling of dread prickled at her skin, but she dismissed it immediately. She was always in control. Always. Liam's expression softened as he noticed the flicker of fear in her eyes. "You're safe. Your tests showed some unusual patterns. We're going to run more, but we're making sure everything's okay." Ava wasn't sure if it was his calm demeanor or the undeniable sense of vulnerability she felt in this moment. But something about his presence unsettled her. He wasn't like the others. There were no motives behind his words, no agenda hidden behind his gaze. He wasn't a board member looking for a favor or a colleague offering hollow praise. He was just concerned. But that in itself was terrifying. Ava swallowed the knot that had formed in her throat. "What do you mean, unusual patterns?" She tried to sit up again, this time with more determination. But Liam gently pressed a hand on her shoulder, urging her back down. "Nothing too alarming, Miss Hawthorne, but we noticed some inconsistencies in your blood work. We're still running tests to be sure. It's nothing to panic about, just precautionary." "Is it because of the drink?" Ava blurted out, her mind racing back to the moment she'd felt the dizziness take over, her hand going slack, the glass slipping from her fingers. "I drank champagne at the gala. I feel like—" "You may have been poisoned," Liam said flatly, cutting her off. Ava's heart skipped a beat. Poisoned? She shook her head, unable to fully process the words. "That doesn't make any sense," she murmured. Liam's gaze turned serious, his eyes locking onto hers. "I know this is hard to understand right now, but it's the most likely explanation. We'll know more once the tests come back, but I want you to be prepared." Ava's chest tightened. Poisoned. It was an absurd thought, an impossible one. She was Ava Hawthorne, the powerful CEO who had built her company from the ground up. She wasn't someone who could be taken down so easily, especially not in a room full of influential people. Who would want to hurt her? But as the reality began to set in, Ava realized one undeniable truth. She was vulnerable. And the nurse, the man sitting before her, was the only person in this room who seemed to know exactly how to handle it. Ava was still reeling from Liam's blunt words. Poisoned. The thought rattled in her mind like a persistent echo, refusing to be silenced. Poisoned. Her, of all people. She had spent years building a reputation, an empire surrounded by people who wanted something from her. She wasn't naive enough to think that the world wasn't full of sharks, but to be so vulnerable, so fragile, it unsettled her in a way that no business rival ever could. Liam's calm presence was the only thing grounding her in the midst of her spiraling thoughts. He wasn't like anyone she'd encountered before. He was direct but kind, observant without being invasive. As he hovered near her, adjusting the IV and monitoring her vitals, she couldn't help but feel a strange pull. It wasn't romantic, at least not at first, but something in the way he treated her, not as a billionaire CEO but as a person, unsettled her. "You're doing well," Liam said, his voice even as he checked her monitors. "Heart rate's steady. BP's coming back to normal. We'll have the results from the lab soon." Ava's eyes followed his every movement. His hands were steady, confident. He knew what he was doing. There was something undeniably comforting about the way he moved through the room, almost as if the chaos of the hospital was just another part of the daily routine for him. She envied that calmness, that ability to be grounded when everything around her seemed to be spinning out of control. She tried to focus on what he was saying. "Tests." "Right," she murmured, trying to sound nonchalant. But the tightness in her chest betrayed her. "I know this is probably a lot to take in right now, but you're in good hands," Liam reassured her, turning to face her fully now. "I'm just going to check with the doctor on your test results. Try to rest, Ms. Hawthorne." The formality of the way he addressed her, Ms. Hawthorne, was a stark reminder of the world she came from, the world where every person had their place, their role. It was always business, always distance. But with Liam, that distance didn't exist. He wasn't intimidated by her status or her wealth. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen for who she really was. Not the CEO, not the face of a billion-dollar company, but just Ava. When he stepped out of the room, Ava's mind raced. Poison. Who would do such a thing? It didn't make sense. The gala had been filled with high-profile investors, tech moguls, politicians, people who would have everything to lose if she were gone. But the more Ava thought about it, the more the idea of sabotage seemed plausible. A rivalry, a betrayal. She had no shortage of enemies in her line of work, and business was often as cutthroat as the city that never slept. But Liam's words still lingered. He hadn't seemed shocked by the idea. He had said it like it was a matter of fact. Poisoned. Could it have been an accident? A mistake? Her fingers flexed at her side, the faint ache in her body from the lingering effects of the drug still pulsing beneath her skin. Whatever it was, she needed answers. The door clicked open, and Liam returned, his expression slightly more serious than before. "Your test results are in," he said, drawing the curtain back to stand beside her bed. "The good news is we've ruled out any immediate threats to your health, but there's something else." Ava felt a surge of apprehension. "What is it?" Liam hesitated for a moment, then met her eyes. "It's not just the alcohol you drank. There's something else. An unusual chemical compound was found in your system. A toxic agent that doesn't belong in a regular drink. It's been carefully administered, not by accident." Ava's stomach dropped. The weight of his words hit her like a cold wave. Carefully administered. "So someone did this on purpose?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what it seems like." Liam's expression softened, a flicker of concern flashing in his eyes. "I know it's hard to grasp right now, but this is something you should take seriously. We'll do everything we can to figure out what happened, but for now, you need to rest and stay calm." Ava closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. Calm. Stay calm. But how could she stay calm? She had always been in control of her business, of her life, and now she was completely at the mercy of someone else. She hated that feeling, the sensation of being vulnerable and exposed. Who would do something like this? She asked quietly, almost to herself, as she opened her eyes again, meeting his steady gaze. I don't get it. I'm just a CEO. No one important enough to kill, at least not like this. Liam's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly. You'd be surprised what people are willing to do when there's money, power, or a personal vendetta involved. Ava's heart skipped at the hint of a deeper meaning behind his words. She had always believed that power was everything, that it protected you, kept you safe. But here she was, in a sterile hospital bed, the victim of an attack that was as deliberate as it was terrifying. A silence fell between them, heavy and full of unspoken thoughts. Ava didn't know what to say next. She had never been good at accepting help, especially not from someone like Liam. He was just a nurse. He didn't belong in her world. And yet, in the span of just a few hours, he had seen her at her weakest, when she had been stripped of the armor she'd so carefully crafted over the years. The truth was, she felt a strange sense of relief in his presence. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't trying to manipulate her, to use her for his own gain. His concern for her seemed genuine, untainted by the usual undercurrents of ambition that characterized her world. I'll be here, Liam said after a long pause, his voice steady. If you need anything, just let me know. Ava nodded, unsure of what to say. She wasn't sure if she needed him, but in that moment, she realized that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't as alone as she'd felt before. As Liam stepped away from her bed, Ava closed her eyes, her mind swirling with a mixture of fear and confusion. This wasn't just about the poisoning anymore. It was about something deeper, something that she couldn't quite place, something that was drawing her to him in a way that she wasn't prepared for. Her life had just shifted in ways she couldn't fully understand. But one thing was clear. The man who had saved her tonight was about to become a part of her life, whether she was ready for it or not. The days after Ava's hospitalization passed in a blur of tests, evaluations, and restless nights. The initial shock had faded, replaced by an unrelenting drive to understand what had happened to her and why. Though the doctors reassured her that she was physically fine, the emotional fallout was another matter entirely. She could still feel the echo of her collapse, the moment when control had slipped through her fingers like sand. But Ava wasn't one to wallow for long. She was a woman of action, a woman who made things happen. She couldn't afford to stay in the hospital forever. The business world she had carefully built was waiting, and as much as her body ached from the drugs that had coursed through her veins, her mind itched to get back to her empire. Still, one thing had changed since that night. Her thoughts kept returning to the man who had taken care of her, Liam Foster, the nurse, the one person who had never treated her like a business deal. Liam had visited her every day, just to check in, to ensure her recovery was on track. At first, Ava had dismissed him as just another health professional doing his job. But as the days wore on, she found herself looking forward to his visits. His easy confidence, the quiet strength in his demeanor, his refusal to be intimidated by her wealth. It was all a strange contrast to the polished world she inhabited. Each time he spoke, she felt something stir inside her, a vulnerability she wasn't used to feeling. It wasn't just physical attraction, though she couldn't deny that Liam was handsome in a way that was both familiar and foreign to her. It was something deeper. His care for her, without expecting anything in return, was something she hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever, and that was terrifying. On the third day after her release from the hospital, Ava stood at her penthouse apartment window, gazing out over the city she had conquered. The glass of champagne in her hand was half full, the bubbles dancing at the surface. She could feel the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. She had a company to run, a reputation to rebuild. But there was still a gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach, the uncertainty of the poison lingering in her veins, both literally and metaphorically. She hadn't told anyone yet about the possible sabotage, not her family, not her colleagues. There was something about the situation that felt too personal. It wasn't just an attack on her career. It was a violation of everything she had built, every wall she had constructed around her life. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from Miranda, her older sister and closest advisor. Miranda, we need to talk. I'm scheduling a meeting for tomorrow morning at 9. Don't forget. This is about the merger, Ava. You need to be present. Ava's fingers tightened around the glass. The pressure from her family to focus on the business, to make decisions that would secure their future, was suffocating. Miranda had never understood the need for Ava to step away from the business, not even for a moment. To her, everything was always about the next deal, the next opportunity, the next power play. And yet, something inside Ava was resisting. A voice inside her, quiet but insistent, was urging her to pause, to listen to what her body and mind were telling her. For the first time in years, she didn't want to be the ruthless CEO. She didn't want to drown in the constant drive to succeed. What she wanted, what she desperately needed, was something real, something human. A knock at the door startled her. Ava blinked, momentarily confused. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this hour. She set her glass down and walked across the room, glancing through the peephole. It was Liam. Her heart skipped in her chest. He hadn't called ahead, and she hadn't expected him to drop by. Not like this. He had said he'd be checking in by phone today, but she hadn't expected an in-person visit. Taking a steadying breath, Ava opened the door. "Ms. Hawthorne," Liam greeted her, his voice soft but warm, his eyes meeting hers with the same steady confidence that had captivated her since the first moment they'd met. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to check on how you're doing." She didn't know why, but his words made her feel something she hadn't in a long time. A longing. She was used to people calling her by her title, but hearing it from him felt different. Genuine. Not transactional. "No, not at all. Come in," Ava said, stepping aside to let him enter. She immediately regretted how eager her voice had sounded, but then she didn't want him to leave. She wasn't ready to face the emptiness of her apartment alone again. Liam stepped into the apartment, looking around briefly before his eyes settled on her again. "I just wanted to see how you're holding up. The last few days have probably been overwhelming." "You could say that," Ava replied, a hint of bitterness in her tone. She wasn't sure if it was aimed at the situation or the way her life had unraveled in such a short span of time. "I've never had my life come to a halt quite like this before." He nodded understandingly. "I can imagine. But you're doing better. You're stronger than you think." Ava swallowed, her gaze meeting his. For the first time, she saw something other than professionalism in his eyes, something warmer, something softer. She wasn't sure if she was reading too much into it, but there was a flicker of something there. "I've been thinking about everything," she began, not sure where the words were coming from. "About what happened, about why someone would want to hurt me. I can't help but feel like it's all just part of the bigger game. Business, family, everything." Liam's eyes softened as he stepped closer. "You can't control what happens to you, Ava, but you can control how you move forward." The way he said her name, so simple, so unburdened by the weight of her reputation, made her stomach flutter in a way she didn't expect. She hated how much she needed that reassurance, how much she wanted to hear him tell her that everything would be okay. Ava felt a rush of emotion, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: vulnerability. It was an unfamiliar sensation, and it terrified her. She wanted to shut it down, retreat into the fortress she had built around herself, but something about Liam made her want to stay open. "I'm not sure I know how to move forward," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Liam's hand brushed against hers, almost instinctively, a simple touch that made her heart race. He was close now, so close that she could feel the warmth of his presence wrapping around her. There was a tension between them, a space that both of them were unwilling to close just yet. "You don't have to do it alone," Liam said quietly. In that moment, as she stood there with him, something in Ava shifted. For the first time, she considered the possibility that she didn't have to shoulder everything on her own, that maybe, just maybe, there was someone she could trust. And as much as that terrified her, it was also the most hopeful thought she'd had in a long time. She didn't know where this connection would lead, but one thing was clear. It was changing everything. The days stretched out into an uneasy quiet, each one bringing its own subtle shift in Ava's world. The weight of her family's expectations, the unspoken pressure from Miranda to focus on business, pressed harder with each passing moment. It was as though Ava's recovery, her vulnerability, had been a mere distraction from the life she'd spent so many years constructing. Every email, every phone call, was a reminder that her empire wasn't going to wait for her to heal. But something inside her, something deep and unsettling, kept drawing her back to Liam. His visits had become more than just check-ins. Each time he came, she found herself holding her breath as he walked through the door, the rhythm of his steady footsteps making her feel strangely alive. The way he looked at her, like she was just another human being, not a CEO, not an icon, was disorienting in the best way. She couldn't quite explain it, but his presence was both a balm and a catalyst. It was like something she hadn't even realized she'd been craving, something that went beyond the glittering towers of wealth and the sharp edges of her corporate world. Liam made her feel seen in a way no one else did, and it terrified her. But the world she lived in, the world of influence, money, and power, was always watching. And that world didn't care about feelings. It didn't care about vulnerability. It only cared about results. The tension finally snapped that morning when Miranda stormed into her apartment, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors as she made her way straight toward Ava, who was standing by the window gazing out at the skyline. "We need to talk, Ava," Miranda said, her voice clipped, betraying no warmth. "I've been in contact with the board. They're starting to ask questions. You need to show up today. At the merger meeting. We can't afford for you to be absent. Not now." Ava didn't move, her gaze still fixed on the city below. The noise of the city was so different from the stillness of her apartment. There was a cacophony of activity, people hustling in every direction, the grind never stopping. But here, in her penthouse, it was too quiet. "Ava?" Miranda's voice broke through her thoughts, sharper now. "What's going on with you? You've been distant. Is this about the poisoning?" "Because I told you. We can't afford to be weak. This is a crucial moment for the company. People are watching and they're talking." Ava turned slowly, her eyes meeting her sister's. "You think I'm being weak?" Miranda paused, her expression faltering for a split second. "I'm just saying that we don't have the luxury of taking a break. You're needed. The board needs you. The company needs you." "I know what the company needs," Ava said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "But maybe it's not just about the company anymore." Miranda's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" Ava inhaled deeply, her mind spinning, but she couldn't stop the words now. It means I'm tired of being this. This woman who just puts on a suit, shows up, and does what everyone expects. I'm tired of being the perfect CEO, the perfect sister. I'm not just that. Miranda's lips pressed into a thin line, and she took a step forward, her voice low but forceful. What exactly are you saying, Ava? You're letting your personal life interfere with the business. Do you have any idea how that makes us look? This isn't just about you anymore. People depend on us. The company depends on us. Ava clenched her fists at her sides, trying to rein in the anger and frustration that threatened to spill over. She had built this empire, sacrificed her own personal happiness for years, and now that she was finally starting to consider something beyond work, something more real, Miranda couldn't understand. She was too driven by the need for success, too blinded by the corporate game to see that there was more to life than deals and mergers. I'm not just a CEO, Miranda, Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper now, but it felt like the most powerful thing she'd said in years. I don't want to be just that anymore. There was a silence between them, thick with tension. For a moment Miranda didn't speak, her eyes narrowing slightly as though she were trying to process her sister's words. Then, with a huff, she shook her head, her tone icy. You're being naive. You can't afford to stop. People are already questioning you. If you don't show up at that meeting, we risk losing everything. Ava felt the truth of Miranda's words slice through her like a blade. She was right, of course. The company couldn't stop. The world wouldn't let her stop. But was this the life she wanted to live? Was this all there was? Endless meetings, deals, and corporate maneuvers that left no room for anything else? She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, her phone buzzed from the coffee table. Ava glanced at the screen, and for the briefest moment, the world seemed to slow down. It was a message from Liam. Liam, I hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need anything. I'll be here tomorrow morning to check in. You've got this. Ava's heart skipped. Just his words, simple, unadorned, somehow felt like a lifeline. Miranda followed her gaze, her eyes narrowing as she saw the name on the phone screen. Who's that? Ava quickly locked the phone and set it down, but Miranda was already stepping forward, her voice low and almost accusatory. Is that him? The nurse? Ava's stomach twisted. She could feel the tension thickening in the room. Miranda didn't even try to hide her judgment. Is this some kind of distraction, Ava? You need to focus. This isn't about some nurse. Ava stood her ground, meeting her sister's gaze. It's not like that. Then what is it? Miranda pressed. Because I'm not sure you realize what you're risking by getting involved with someone who doesn't belong in our world. Ava's chest tightened at the words. She had never let anyone get too close, not after everything she had built, not after all the people who had tried to use her for their own gain. But with Liam, it was different. She didn't want to explain it, not now. Not to Miranda, who would never understand. I'm not getting involved with anyone, Ava said, her voice quiet but firm. But I am trying to figure out who I am outside of this, outside of the company. And I think it's time you stop telling me what I need to do. Miranda's lips tightened into a thin line, and for a moment it looked as though she might argue further. But instead, she gave a curt nod and turned toward the door. We'll see, Ava. Just remember, the company doesn't wait for anyone. Ava didn't respond, watching as her sister left, the door clicking shut behind her. She stood alone now, the weight of the world settling heavily on her shoulders. The decision she was facing wasn't easy. She knew that. But for the first time she realized that she didn't want to make this decision alone. She pulled her phone back toward her and glanced at the message again, her fingers hovering over the screen. She wasn't sure what the future with Liam looked like, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth seeing where it could go. Because for the first time in a long time, Ava wasn't sure if being the perfect CEO was enough anymore. Maybe it was time for something different, something real. Ava hadn't realized how deeply the weight of Miranda's words had sunk into her until the next morning. The hours after their conversation passed in a blur. Work emails, conference calls, and a constant stream of obligations. Each task, each responsibility, felt more like a chain around her ankle, pulling her further from the one thing she wanted to focus on: herself. She hadn't responded to Liam's message. She hadn't been ready to open that door again, not yet. But as the day wore on, the absence of his presence felt louder than any of the noise around her. For the first time in a long time, Ava found herself questioning the path she had set for herself, the path she had walked down so confidently for years. Was this all there was? Was she destined to be a CEO who never felt truly alive? A woman who kept everyone at arm's length? A knock at the door snapped her from her thoughts. "Ms. Hawthorne?" It was Liam's voice, calm and even but unmistakably close. Ava's heart gave a little jolt, and she quickly smoothed her hair, standing up from her desk, her palms suddenly sweaty. She hadn't expected him to come today, but there he was. Without thinking, she crossed the room and opened the door. Liam was standing in the doorway, wearing his usual scrubs, his dark hair slightly tousled from the day's work. But it wasn't just his appearance that made Ava's breath catch. It was the way he was looking at her, like he hadn't seen her in days, as if he were waiting for something, waiting for her. "Hi," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "Hi," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She stepped aside, her heart racing in a way she couldn't explain. "I didn't expect you—" "I know," Liam said, offering her a slight smile as he stepped inside. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me here, but I thought I'd check in, make sure you're okay." He paused, glancing at her with that same steady calm. "But if I'm interrupting, I can leave." "No, you're not interrupting," Ava said quickly. Perhaps too quickly. She was acutely aware of how she was standing, how her heart was beating in her chest. What was this? This strange pull, this tension that seemed to grow the closer he got. She opened her mouth to say something else, but the words slipped away, leaving her with only the soft hum of her thoughts. Liam set his bag down near the door and turned toward her, his gaze not leaving hers. "How are you really doing?" Ava hesitated, the question hitting her in a way she hadn't expected. How was she doing? She wanted to say fine. She wanted to brush it off and tell him that she was just another woman living in the fast lane, doing what was necessary to maintain her empire. But somehow, in that moment, she couldn't lie to him, not in the same way she had lied to herself for years. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice low. "I thought I had everything figured out. The business, my life, my everything. But now it feels like I'm falling apart." Liam watched her quietly, his expression softening, his posture shifting just slightly to lean toward her, though he didn't break the space between them. "I don't think you're falling apart, Ava. I think you're just seeing things for what they are, things you didn't want to see before." Ava's chest tightened at his words. It was true, wasn't it? She had always kept her eyes fixed on the next achievement, the next victory, anything to distract from the loneliness that gnawed at her from within. But now, here she was, confronting a part of herself she had avoided for too long. "You know, I've spent years building this company, making decisions that have nothing to do with anything other than power," Ava said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've told myself it was enough, that if I just kept pushing, kept winning, I'd be okay. but it's not enough. And I can't keep pretending it is. Liam stepped a little closer, his voice quiet, but full of empathy. You don't have to pretend, Ava. You don't have to keep hiding behind all of this. He gestured around her luxurious apartment, the glass and steel walls that reflected the skyline. You can be more than just the woman who runs a company. You can be yourself if you let people see that. Ava felt a rush of conflicting emotions: relief, fear, anger, and an unfamiliar vulnerability. This man, this nurse, was looking at her like she mattered, not because of her wealth or status, but because of who she was underneath it all. The thought made her heart pound in her chest, but she couldn't be that woman, not yet. Not now. I'm not sure I know how to be that woman, she whispered, her voice faltering as she stared at the floor, unsure if she wanted to meet his eyes. Liam took another step forward, his hand hovering just a breath away from hers, a gesture of silent support. Maybe you don't have to know yet. Maybe it's enough just to start. Ava looked up then, her eyes locking with his. There was something in his gaze, something warm and genuine. It felt like an invitation, a soft pull towards something she wasn't sure she could handle, but couldn't resist. Her heart fluttered, a small breath escaping her lips. And what if I fail? She asked, her voice barely audible, the fear and uncertainty she'd buried for so long creeping to the surface. Liam's smile was soft, but certain. Then you'll get up. You'll keep going. But you won't be alone. Ava's chest tightened. She wanted to say something smart, something powerful, something that would shut this all down before it could go too far. But the words caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to retreat back into the safety of her old life, where she didn't have to deal with feelings. But instead, she found herself standing there, in the quiet of her apartment, with Liam's warmth just inches away, asking her to step into the unknown. To be more than just a CEO, more than just a woman hiding behind the walls of her own empire. She felt a flicker of hope, real hope, sparking deep within her. Maybe it was time for something new, something she couldn't control. She swallowed hard, meeting Liam's eyes once more. And what if I want to try? She asked quietly. Liam didn't answer right away. Instead, he just nodded, his gaze filled with an understanding she didn't expect. And then, he stepped back, giving her space but not retreating. Then we'll figure it out together. Ava wasn't sure what that meant, wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. Because maybe, just maybe, the only thing she had to fear now was not allowing herself to live. The sun had dipped below the skyline by the time the meeting was over. Ava sat in her sleek office staring at the files laid out before her, but she couldn't focus on any of it. The weight of Miranda's pressure still lingered in her chest, a constant reminder that no matter how much she tried to break free from the confines of her role, she was tethered to it. The merger was on the horizon, and with it, the future of her company, her empire, hung in the balance. Miranda had all but demanded that Ava be fully present at the meeting, her sharp words echoing in Ava's mind. The company needs you, Ava. You can't afford to be distracted right now. It was the same message she had heard 1,000 times before, each repetition drilling into her the belief that her worth was tied to her success, that she was nothing without her work. Miranda didn't care about the toll it was taking on her, or the cracks forming in the life Ava had so carefully curated. All Miranda saw was the CEO, the figurehead. But it wasn't just Miranda who was exerting influence over Ava. The board had begun to ask questions too. Was she still fit to lead? Was she strong enough after the poisoning incident? They wanted assurances that nothing would interfere with the merger. Nothing personal, nothing that could destabilize the company. Ava leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her hair, frustration building in her chest. She wanted to rebel against it all, but it was hard to ignore the truth. She was at a crossroads, and each decision she made felt like it would change everything. Just as she was about to pull herself back into the relentless grind, her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen. It was a text from Liam. "Liam, just checking in. I know things have been hectic, but I'm here if you need to talk. I'm not going anywhere." A small wave of warmth spread through her chest as she read his words. She had never realized how much a simple text could anchor her in the storm. Despite the chaos of her professional life, Liam had become a constant in a way that neither Miranda nor the board could ever be. The thought made her feel something raw, something vulnerable, that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. But just as quickly as that warmth appeared, the fear returned. She couldn't let herself get too close to him. Not yet. Not when everything else in her life was hanging by a thread. She wasn't ready to lean on anyone else, not even him. Still, she couldn't shake the pull to respond. She picked up her phone and typed out a reply before she could second-guess herself. "Ava. Thanks, Liam. I'll be okay. I'm just trying to keep everything together right now. I appreciate you checking in." She stared at the message for a moment before hitting send, immediately regretting it. It wasn't what she truly felt. She wasn't okay. Not at all. But she couldn't afford to admit that. Not to Liam, not to anyone. The weight of responsibility was too much for her to relinquish, even for a moment. As if on cue, her door opened, and Miranda stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Ava's pulse quickened, and she quickly put her phone face down on the desk, turning her attention to her sister. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Miranda said, her tone cool and calculated as usual. "But we need to talk. The merger is moving forward, and you need to be ready. You can't afford to be distracted, Ava. People are starting to talk." Ava stood up from her chair, doing her best to mask the unease that gripped her. "I'm aware, Miranda. I've got it under control." Miranda raised an eyebrow. "You might think you do, but if you keep letting personal issues interfere with work, you're going to lose everything you've worked for. You need to decide what's more important, this company or whatever you're getting caught up in right now." The words hit like a slap, though they were no surprise. This was the same conversation they'd had 100 times, and Ava was tired of it. She didn't have the energy to argue anymore. Miranda was a force, a whirlwind of ambition who couldn't see beyond her own narrow worldview. "I know what's at stake," Ava said, her voice hardening as she turned to face her sister. "But I'm not sure I can keep pretending that everything is fine, that nothing matters outside of business. I'm not sure I want to." Miranda's expression shifted, her lips thinning into a tight line. "Is this about him? The nurse?" "Ava, I don't know what's going on between you two, but I'm telling you, you can't afford to make personal decisions based on someone like that." Ava's heart skipped a beat. The mention of Liam felt like a sharp knife twisting in her chest. Miranda's disapproval was unmistakable, but Ava didn't care. Not this time. She couldn't go back to being the person she once was, the woman who pushed away everything that didn't fit neatly into her world of control and power. But before she could respond, the door to her office opened again, this time with a much less welcome visitor. "Ms. Hawthorne!" James Morgan's voice slithered into the room as he walked in without waiting for permission. His presence filled the space in a way that always made Ava uncomfortable. Tall, dark-haired, and impeccably dressed, James exuded an air of entitlement that rubbed Ava the wrong way. He was a board member, and though he had never been outwardly rude, she had always sensed something beneath the surface, something that didn't quite sit right. "I hope I'm not interrupting," James said, his eyes flicking between Ava and Miranda, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "But I thought we should discuss the latest developments regarding the merger. The board's starting to get anxious, And they want to know where you stand, Ava. We all know how important this is, for you and for all of us. Ava felt the walls of her carefully curated world press in on her as James's gaze settled on her. She knew what he wanted. He was always subtle in his demands, always trying to gauge her weakness so he could manipulate it. His interests were self-serving, and his smile was as fake as his charm. "I'm aware, James," Ava replied, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. "I've got it under control. I'll handle it." James didn't seem to take her words seriously. He stepped closer, his gaze lingering just a bit too long. "I hope you do. The board's been discussing your leadership recently. They're wondering if you're still the right fit for this. After all, a leader needs to be able to handle more than just business." Ava's jaw tightened. She was done playing this game. She couldn't let James's insinuations break her. Not now. Not when she had something more important to focus on. Something that had nothing to do with the cold world of boardrooms and numbers. "Don't worry, James," Ava said, her tone icy. "I'm more than capable of handling this, and if the board has concerns, they can take it up with me directly." James's smirk faltered for just a moment, but he quickly masked it with a nod. "Of course, Ms. Hawthorne. Just remember, there's a lot at stake here, for all of us." As he turned to leave, Miranda shot Ava a sharp, knowing look. Ava was left standing there, feeling the weight of everything, her company, her family's expectations, and the fear that she might lose control of it all. But something in her had changed. For the first time, she wasn't sure she cared. She glanced at her phone again. There was another message from Liam. She opened it, her heart quickening as she read his words. "Liam, I know you're going through a lot right now, but I'm still here. I'm here for you, Ava, whenever you need me." A small, tentative smile tugged at Ava's lips. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop pretending. Time to start making decisions for herself. The day had barely begun, but Ava felt the weight of it already settling heavily on her shoulders. Her meeting with the board had been uneventful but tense. James Morgan had been his usual self, polite with an undercurrent of condescension, and Miranda had been uncharacteristically quiet, her disapproval of Ava's emotional state still clear in her eyes. But it wasn't the board that was on her mind now. It wasn't the merger, or even the company's future, which was on the precipice of change. It was the nagging, persistent thought that had been creeping into her mind for days. What was she doing with Liam? She had been so sure that her life was about building power, about protecting herself from the vulnerabilities that had always threatened to unravel her. But the closer she got to Liam, the more she questioned everything she thought she knew. She had tried to convince herself it was just a brief distraction. Someone who was kind to her. Someone who didn't see her as the almighty CEO, but as a woman who was struggling with her own fears and doubts. And yet, the thought of him made her feel something deeper than she'd ever allowed herself to feel before. But what was she supposed to do with that? A knock at the door broke her reverie. Ava glanced up, startled. It was far too early for anyone to be here. She stood up, smoothing her blouse, trying to compose herself before opening the door. "Ms. Hawthorne," Liam said, his familiar voice a gentle balm to her fraying nerves. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I thought you might need someone to talk to." Ava's heart fluttered, and for the briefest moment, she felt a rush of warmth flood through her. He was always so sure of himself, so grounded, and yet there was something in his voice, something soft and caring, that made her feel like he was reaching out to her in a way no one else had. "You're not interrupting," she said quickly, stepping aside to let him in. As he walked past her, she couldn't help but notice the slight tension in his shoulders. He was always so composed, but today there was something different about him. His usual easy confidence seemed to have shifted, and Ava couldn't quite place why. Liam glanced around the sleek apartment, taking in the immaculate design, the modern elegance of everything. He looked back at her, his eyes soft, almost wistful. "This place is impressive," he said, "but I've never seen you here. You've always been so focused on business. It's rare that you make time for yourself, isn't it?" Ava froze. He had hit the mark. Her entire life had been centered around her work. Her company, her reputation, her drive for success. But where had that gotten her? The more time she spent with Liam, the more she realized that the walls she had built around her weren't just protecting her from the world. They were suffocating her. "I suppose I've never really stopped to consider what I want," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt a pang of vulnerability in admitting that out loud, and she quickly looked away, not wanting him to see just how much of herself she was revealing in that moment. Liam took a step closer, his presence more comforting than overwhelming. "Ava," he said, his voice steady but full of warmth, "you don't have to figure it all out right now. You don't have to have all the answers, especially not when it comes to what's best for you." She met his gaze then, the intensity of his words sinking in. He was right. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't even know what she wanted anymore, but she knew she needed something real, something grounded. And as much as she tried to push it away, that something was starting to feel like Liam. But there were consequences, weren't there? There was always something else to consider. "The board is expecting results," she said, pulling away from the moment, needing to ground herself in the reality of the situation. "And Miranda, she thinks I'm losing focus. There's too much at stake with the merger. I can't afford to be distracted, not now." Liam's expression softened, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he stood quietly, as if giving her the space to sort through her thoughts. "What do you want, Ava?" "Not what Miranda wants, not what the board wants. What do you need?" Ava swallowed, her throat dry. She had been so used to living her life for others, whether it was her family, her colleagues, or the countless strangers who saw her as a symbol of power and success. She'd forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. She didn't even know what she wanted anymore. She stopped herself, shaking her head. I don't know. I don't know what I want. I've spent so long building this life, this company. It's everything I've worked for. I can't just walk away from it." Liam's gaze was steady, unwavering. "I'm not asking you to walk away from anything. I'm just asking you to consider what you need to feel whole again, whether that's the company or something else." His words hung in the air like a challenge, one that Ava wasn't sure she was ready to face. The tug between her desire for control and the pull of what she was feeling for him was stronger than ever. "I've spent so much time convincing myself that power is everything," she whispered, almost to herself. "But maybe it's not. Maybe I've been wrong." Liam stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "It's not about being wrong, Ava. It's about recognizing that you're allowed to have both. You're allowed to have love and success and everything in between." Ava looked at him, a mix of gratitude and confusion flooding her. She hadn't allowed herself to consider that before. It had always been one or the other. Success had been her shield, her armor. But in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in years, a possibility, a chance to live outside of the boundaries she had set for herself. But there was still the looming reality of the merger, of the board's pressure, of her family's expectations. All the things she had fought so hard to achieve. "I can't just let go of everything," she said, her voice tight, even though she didn't want to believe it. "I don't know how." Liam's hand reached out, gently brushing her arm, grounding her in the moment. You don't have to let go of everything, but maybe you can start with one thing, trusting yourself, trusting that what you need will come to you if you just let it. Ava closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin. It was a simple gesture, but it shook her to the core. She had always trusted in her own strength, in her own ability to control every aspect of her life. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of that need for control, to allow herself to embrace the uncertainty of what was unfolding between them. The silence between them stretched out, and for the first time in a long time, Ava didn't feel afraid. The decision wasn't easy, but maybe the hardest part was accepting that she didn't have to have everything figured out. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, Liam could be part of what helped her find her way. Ava sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the phone in her hands, the words from Liam's last message echoing in her mind. He hadn't been by today, and that simple fact left her unsettled. She missed his presence, the calm assurance he brought with him, the way he seemed to see right through her defenses. Liam, take your time. I'm here when you're ready to talk. I'm not going anywhere. His words were a comfort, yet they also brought with them a sharp sting. There was so much she wanted to tell him, so much she had to work through, but the reality of her life, her duties as CEO, the ongoing pressure from her family, the relentless demands of the merger, kept pulling her away from the only thing that seemed real right now, Liam. She had tried to compartmentalize, to bury the thoughts of him beneath the weight of her responsibilities. But they kept creeping back, filling the silence in her mind. It was maddening, the way he had gotten under her skin without even trying. He made her feel things she had long abandoned: vulnerability, desire, hope. But there was something else, something darker, that she couldn't ignore. The phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Liam. It was a call from her lawyer, Carter Blake, the one person she trusted to help navigate the labyrinth of her business dealings. Ava, I need to speak with you about something urgent. Carter's voice came through, his usual calm tone edged with a hint of concern. We've received some troubling information. I think it's time we talked about your company's security breach. A cold chill ran through Ava. The words security breach sent her mind racing. Her pulse quickened as she sat up straighter. There had been whispers of espionage, sabotage, rumors of leaks in the system, but Ava had pushed them aside as the paranoia of an overactive board. Now it seemed those whispers had teeth. Tell me everything, she said, her voice steady, but betraying the undercurrent of tension building inside her. We've been monitoring your digital infrastructure closely, Carter continued, and it looks like someone within your inner circle may have been feeding information to a competitor. It's subtle, Ava, but it's there. Financial reports, confidential strategies, even personal emails have been accessed. Ava's stomach dropped. She had trusted her team, trusted her family, and the thought that someone might be betraying her, undermining her in the very way she had feared, was enough to make her feel physically ill. Do we have any leads? She asked, her voice sharper now. We've narrowed it down to a few suspects, Carter said, the gravity of the situation evident in his tone. But the most troubling part is this. There's evidence suggesting that this breach started before the poisoning incident. Whoever is involved may have had access to you long before you even realized it. Ava felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. So this isn't just about business. Someone has been trying to hurt me personally? It's hard to say for sure, but yes, it appears there's more at play here than just corporate espionage. It may be someone who has a personal stake in your downfall. Ava sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always trusted her instincts when it came to business. But this felt different. There was a sense of betrayal in the air that she couldn't escape. Someone in her life was willing to risk everything to see her fall, to tear down the very empire she had built. "I'll need a full report," Ava said, her voice firm despite the turmoil inside. "And I want to meet with you tomorrow. We're going to get to the bottom of this." She hung up, her mind spinning. This wasn't just a betrayal of her business, it was personal. And it was beginning to feel like it was all connected. The poisoning, the leak of information, the ever-looming threat to her company's future. Someone was orchestrating this carefully, strategically. Someone who had been watching her, learning her weaknesses. The thought made her skin crawl. She needed answers, and she needed Liam. Despite all the doubts, the fears, the self-imposed walls she had built around herself, she realized that the only person who had offered her any semblance of clarity in this mess was him. Liam had seen her, truly seen her, in ways no one else had. He had given her a chance to be more than the person she had become, more than just the powerful woman in control of everything. But was it all too risky? Was she ready to bring him into this? A sharp knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Ava stood quickly, her heart racing, wondering who it could be. She walked across the room and opened the door, only to be greeted by an unexpected sight. Liam stood there, looking as calm as ever, but his eyes were filled with something more, something that made her stomach tighten. He was here, in her apartment, just as she had been thinking about him. "Ava," Liam said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a question, of concern. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me, but I had a feeling you might need someone to talk to." Ava didn't hesitate. She stepped aside, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm glad you came." As he stepped in, his eyes scanning the room, Ava couldn't help but feel like the walls between them were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. He didn't rush toward her, but his presence was unmistakable. It was as if he had an intuitive understanding of her, of the storm that was brewing inside her, and that he was simply waiting for her to make the next move. "I've been dealing with something," Ava began, her voice shaky despite her best efforts. "Something bigger than just the merger, something personal." Liam's gaze softened, his body relaxing as he turned to face her. "You don't have to explain anything if you're not ready," he said, his tone gentle. But there was an intensity to his words, as if he could sense the depth of her turmoil. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt the words spill out before she could stop them. "Someone in my life, someone I trusted, has been working against me, trying to tear everything I've built down." Liam didn't move, but his expression shifted, as if he understood the gravity of what she was saying. His eyes held hers, steady and unwavering, as if he were silently telling her that whatever was coming next, he was there for her. "Whoever it is," Liam said softly, "you don't have to face this alone, Ava." The simple words, those few quiet words, hit her like a wave. In that moment, surrounded by the chaos of her life, she realized just how badly she had been craving this. Someone who could see her, someone who would stand by her side, even in the darkest moments. But the question still hung in the air. Could she truly trust him? Could she bring him into the storm that was brewing? Or would he become another casualty in her fight to protect everything she had worked for? And yet, in the quiet space between them, something unspoken lingered. An undeniable connection, a pull that neither of them could deny. The city skyline outside Ava's apartment looked different tonight. The glow of the street lights below, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional flash of a car's headlights against the darkened streets made the world feel both vast and small. Ava felt small tonight, despite the towering buildings that loomed around her, the very same ones she had built her empire upon. Everything felt distant, detached, as if she were floating in a world where none of it mattered. She stood by the window, staring out into the night, her mind tangled in a web of confusion, fear, and uncertainty. The meeting with Carter had done nothing to calm her nerves. She had hoped for a clear answer, some direction, but instead she had only uncovered more questions. Who could she trust? Who had been working against her all this time? And why? The shadows of betrayal felt suffocating, wrapping around her like the very walls of her penthouse. Carter's words still echoed in her mind. It looks like it's someone close to you, Ava, someone with access to everything. Her heart ached at the thought. Miranda, James Morgan, one of her trusted executives. She couldn't even begin to imagine who would want to destroy everything she'd built, or why. But what if it wasn't just business? What if this went deeper? What if it was about something personal? And then, of course, there was Liam. Ava had tried to push him to the back of her mind, to focus on the corporate war that was unfolding around her, but every time she did, her thoughts kept circling back to him. His quiet strength, his unspoken understanding, the way he made her feel like she wasn't just the CEO, like she was more than the sum of her power and wealth. But could she really trust him? Could she trust anyone? The doorbell rang, pulling Ava from her reverie. She had been expecting it, though she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. Liam. He had texted her earlier, saying he wanted to check in, and although she had convinced herself she was too busy, too focused on the growing crisis within her company, something in her couldn't push him away. She needed someone right now, someone she could trust, even if just for a moment. She opened the door to find him standing there, just as calm as ever, but with something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Concern? Or maybe it was something else, something deeper that neither of them had spoken aloud. "Hi," he said quietly, offering her a small but genuine smile, though she could tell it didn't reach his eyes. "Hi," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. She couldn't help but notice how easy it was to fall into the rhythm of their quiet exchanges, like a routine that neither of them had planned, but both seemed to crave. His presence was like a soft blanket, something comforting amid the chaos. Liam entered, and Ava closed the door behind him, the weight of the moment settling over them both. "You okay?" he asked, his gaze meeting hers as he took a step closer, his voice low, laced with concern. "I don't know," Ava admitted, feeling a crack in the armor she'd been so careful to maintain. "I'm not okay. Not with everything that's happening. There's too much at stake, Liam. I feel like I'm losing control of everything." Liam's eyes softened as he stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You're not losing control," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You've been through a lot and you're handling it. But you don't have to do it alone." Ava swallowed, the vulnerability she'd been trying to suppress bubbling to the surface. "I don't know who I can trust anymore. My family, the board, they all want something from me. They don't care about what I need. It's like I'm drowning in this life I've created, and no one sees it." Liam's gaze didn't waver. "I see you, Ava. I don't know everything about you, but I see the person behind the title, the person who's been carrying the weight of everything alone. And you don't have to." Ava's heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she felt like she was floating in that space between trust and fear. It was terrifying, this feeling, but it was also the most real thing she had experienced in a long time. Liam had no agenda, no hidden motive. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just here, for her. But as much as she wanted to reach for him, to let herself fall into the comfort he offered, something inside her held back. "I can't just stop," Ava said, her voice trembling. "There's too much at risk. My company, my family. They all depend on me. I've spent so many years building this, fighting for everything I have, If I let go, even for a second, it all falls apart. Liam took another step closer, his hand reaching out, gently resting on her arm. His touch was warm, grounding. Ava, you don't have to choose between them and yourself. You deserve to have both. You deserve to be happy. You deserve peace. His words hung in the air between them, and Ava felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She hadn't cried in years, not since the loss of her mother, not since the weight of her responsibilities had become too heavy to bear. But in that moment, in Liam's quiet presence, the floodgates opened. She let out a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I'm not strong enough to carry it all anymore? Liam's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his other hand reaching out to cup her face gently, wiping away the tear with his thumb. You don't have to carry it all alone, Ava. Let me help you. Ava closed her eyes at the touch, at the softness in his voice. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, to feel the vulnerability that she had locked away for so long. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty. It was all there, and it was overwhelming. But in that moment, she realized something. Maybe it was okay to not have all the answers. Maybe it was okay to let someone else in, even if it meant facing the consequences. She opened her eyes and looked up at him, her voice shaky but determined. I don't know what this is, Liam, but I'm scared. I know, he said softly, and that's okay. I'm not going anywhere, Ava. I'm here whenever you're ready. Ava took a deep breath, letting the weight of his words settle over her. Maybe she didn't have to have it all figured out. Maybe for the first time, it was okay to just be human, to let go of the control, just for a moment. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. The storm in her life was far from over, but as Liam stood there, his hand still gently resting on her cheek, Ava realized that maybe, just maybe, she could weather it with him by her side. The weight of the decision hung over Ava like a storm cloud, dark and looming. The air in her penthouse felt thick, heavy with unspoken words and hidden emotions. She had never been one to back down, never one to relinquish control of the situation. But standing in front of Liam now, her heart pounding in her chest, she couldn't help but feel that something was shifting in her, something bigger than just the crisis with her company. Liam's words from the previous night echoed in her mind. You don't have to carry it all alone, Ava. Let me help you. The truth was, she didn't know if she was ready to lean on him. She didn't know if she could let herself be that vulnerable. But there was something in his eyes, something in the steadiness of his presence, that made her question everything. Was she ready to open herself up to him, to trust him with the chaos that had consumed her life for so long? But the larger question loomed in the background. Who could she truly trust? The betrayal she felt from the inner circle of her company, the whispers of espionage, the cold distance from Miranda, all of it had added to the weight she carried. The fear of losing her empire, the fear of losing herself in the process, was something she couldn't shake. She picked up her phone from the side table, staring at the screen. A message from Carter, her lawyer, flashed on the screen. Her breath caught as she read it. Carter, Ava, I've just received some concerning information. We need to talk. It's bigger than just the business. You may be in more danger than you realize. Meet me as soon as possible. Please. Her heart skipped a beat. The dread she had been trying to avoid surged forward, and she immediately felt the cold, gnawing grip of fear tighten in her chest. What was it this time? Another breach? A deeper conspiracy? She immediately texted him back, setting up a meeting for later that evening. She couldn't keep running from the truth. She had to face whatever was coming, and she needed answers about the business, about the people who had betrayed her, and most importantly, about herself. Who was that? Liam's voice brought her back to the present, and she turned to see him standing by the window, looking out at the city below. There was something different in his posture today, something unreadable in his expression. "It's Carter," she replied, her voice betraying her anxiety. "I need to meet with him. Something's happened." Liam turned slowly to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly in concern. "Ava, I don't want to pry, but what is it? What's going on? You've been distant, and I can't help but wonder if this is more than just the company. This is about you, isn't it?" Ava felt her breath hitch in her throat. She hadn't been ready for that question, not from him, not from anyone. But there it was, hanging in the air between them. She didn't answer right away. She couldn't. The truth was, she was more afraid than she had let on. Afraid of losing everything she had worked for, yes, but also afraid of letting go of the control she had so carefully maintained. Afraid of trusting him, of trusting anyone. "I'll be fine," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to get to the bottom of this, figure out who's behind all of it." Liam studied her, his gaze intense, yet gentle. He could see right through her, and for a moment Ava felt exposed. She hated how easily he seemed to read her, how effortlessly he seemed to get under her skin. But there was something comforting about it, too. Something that made her want to believe, even for a moment, that she wasn't alone in this. "Ava," Liam began, stepping closer, his voice low and serious. "You don't have to do this alone. Whatever this is, whatever you're facing, you don't have to face it on your own." Her heart skipped again, this time for a different reason. It was his unwavering support that shook her, the way he said it so confidently, as though he truly meant it. But could she trust him? Could she trust anyone right now? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Miranda. Ava stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "Ava, I've been hearing things." Miranda's voice crackled through the phone. "You need to be careful. There's talk at the board level. They're questioning your ability to lead after everything that's happened. They're concerned that you're too distracted." Ava's grip tightened around her phone. Her chest tightened as Miranda's words settled in. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Her family wanted results, the board wanted assurances, and her own instincts were at war with her heart. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was losing everything, and it made her feel like she was suffocating under the weight of it all. "I'm doing the best I can, Miranda," Ava replied, her voice sharp. "I don't need the board or anyone else telling me how to handle my business." Miranda's voice softened slightly. "Ava, listen to me. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about the company. We can't afford to look weak. You need to make a decision, and you need to make it now. If you don't, we may lose everything. All of it." Ava's stomach churned. Miranda wasn't wrong, but for the first time, Ava found herself questioning everything she had built. Was it worth it? Was the company worth the cost? And if she let it go, what would she have left? Would she be enough without it? She ended the call abruptly, the weight of the conversation hanging over her like a suffocating fog. Turning to Liam, she felt a lump rise in her throat. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine." Liam's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, gently taking her hand in his. "Ava, you don't have to pretend. You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you can choose to take a step forward. Let me help you." For the first time in a long time, Ava didn't feel like she was holding the world on her shoulders alone. She didn't have to carry the weight of it all. Maybe, just maybe, she could let herself trust him. Let herself trust that not all battles had to be fought alone. But before she could speak, there was a knock at the door. Her heart raced in her chest. She turned toward the sound, feeling the heavy weight of what was coming. Whoever was on the other side, whoever had caused the destruction in her life, was about to reveal themselves. Liam squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Ava nodded, unsure if the words would bring her comfort or terror. But she was no longer sure where one ended and the other began. The knock at the door shattered the fragile moment between Ava and Liam, and for a brief instant, Ava wondered if the world would simply stop spinning if she didn't open it. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her: the company, her family, the betrayal that was just beginning to unfold. And yet, it was Liam's steady presence beside her that made her wonder if she could face whatever was coming. Liam's hand remained gently resting on hers, his warmth grounding her, but the tension in the air was palpable. Whoever was outside that door would change everything. Ava inhaled sharply, trying to steady her nerves. The questions, the uncertainty, were building inside her like a storm. Questions that needed answers, and answers she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. "I'll get it," she said softly, trying to sound in control, though her voice was thick with hesitation. Liam didn't protest, but she could see the concern flicker in his eyes. He didn't want her to face this alone. She stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her blouse, taking a moment to center herself. With each step toward the door, her heart beat louder in her chest. When she opened it, the last person she expected to see was standing there. It was James Morgan, the very man who had been making her skin crawl for months. His dark eyes met hers with a kind of smug familiarity, his tailored suit a perfect reflection of the corporate world that had always made her feel out of place. He was always so polished, so assured. But today there was something different. Something in the way his eyes lingered on her, like he was playing a game, and he thought he was winning. "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, but we need to talk," James said smoothly, his voice dripping with that insufferable charm she had come to loathe. He stepped over the threshold before she could say anything, his presence filling the room in a way that made her feel suffocated. Ava's stomach churned. She knew this man far too well, and the last thing she wanted right now was to deal with him. "What do you want, James?" Ava asked, her voice tight with annoyance and the residual unease that had settled in her bones. "I just wanted to check in, make sure you're, how should I say this, making the right decisions moving forward. There are some concerns at the board level," James said, his eyes flicking toward Liam, who had remained silent behind Ava, watching the interaction with quiet intensity. "Concerns about your well-being, I suppose." Ava's breath hitched at his words. She could feel her body tense, but she refused to show him how deeply his insinuations had cut her. She had worked so hard to get to where she was, to carve out her place in the business world, and now, here was James, reminding her that everything could slip through her fingers if she wasn't careful. "I'm fine, James," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've got everything under control." James gave a small, knowing smile, clearly unconvinced. "I'm sure you do," he said with a chuckle. "But the truth is, the board wants someone who is fully present, someone who can lead without distractions." He glanced at Liam, his eyes calculating. "And I'm not sure that's you right now." Ava's pulse quickened at the implication. She could feel the weight of James's words pressing down on her, but she wasn't about to let him see how much it affected her. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let him or anyone else dictate the course of her life. "I think it's time for you to leave, James," Ava said firmly, her gaze locking with his. "I'm not interested in hearing your opinion." James's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I'm just trying to help," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge that made Ava's skin crawl. "I'm looking out for you, Ava. You can't do this alone no matter how much you try to convince yourself otherwise. Liam stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Ava doesn't need your help, James, and I think you should leave. For a moment, Ava was taken aback by the force of Liam's words. She had never seen him this direct, this confident in the face of someone like James. There was something about the way he stood his ground, about the unspoken trust and understanding between them, that made her heart skip a beat. James, for once, seemed caught off guard, his eyes flicking from Liam to Ava, clearly unsure of how to proceed. But after a beat, he straightened, a small sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. If you want to pretend everything is fine, Ava, that's your choice, James said coldly. But don't say I didn't warn you. With that, he turned on his heel and walked out of the apartment, leaving Ava standing there, feeling both relieved and shaken. As the door clicked shut behind him, Ava took a deep breath, her body still tense with the aftermath of the confrontation. Her mind was spinning with all the implications of what James had said. The board was watching her closely. They were questioning her ability to lead, and that fear gnawed at her insides. Liam was silent for a moment, his gaze on her, but there was something else there now, something deeper. It wasn't just concern, it was understanding. He knew how much she had invested in her company, in her family's legacy, and the fear of losing it all had to be suffocating. "Are you okay?" Liam asked softly, his voice laced with empathy. Ava nodded, but the truth was, she wasn't. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the facade of control, the endless parade of meetings and obligations that had defined her existence. She wasn't sure if she was even capable of balancing it all anymore. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped back into the room, her hand instinctively reaching out for him. "I feel like I'm losing myself, Liam. I'm so scared of everything falling apart." Liam didn't hesitate. He reached out, pulling her gently into his arms, his warmth surrounding her like a shield. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ava allowed herself to lean into someone else. She allowed herself to feel the rawness of her emotions, the fear, the vulnerability, and the aching need to let go of the weight she had carried alone for so long. "I'm here," Liam whispered into her hair, his voice steady and comforting. "You don't have to face this alone. Whatever happens, we'll get through it together." Ava closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely, finally allowing herself to break. She wasn't sure what the future held, or if she could truly trust anyone. But in this moment, with Liam's arms around her, she realized one thing. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop pretending she could do it all on her own. Ava had never been one to dwell on uncertainty. For years, she had shaped her life with a steady hand, carefully curated, meticulously planned, and always, always controlled. The world she had built, from the ground up, had been a testament to her drive, her ambition, and her refusal to let anyone define her. But tonight, as she sat on the couch in the quiet of her penthouse, staring at the walls that had once felt like a fortress, she realized how fragile everything truly was. She could still feel the warmth of Liam's arms around her, his whispered promises of support echoing in her mind. For the first time in months, she had allowed herself to lean on someone else, to let the weight of her emotions spill out, to let someone see the cracks beneath the polished surface of the woman everyone else thought they knew. But now, the storm was intensifying. The betrayal at the core of her company, someone inside, someone she had trusted, was threatening to tear it all down. Carter had reached out again, and though he hadn't given her all the details, she could feel the urgency in his voice. There was a piece of the puzzle still missing, something bigger than just corporate espionage. Someone had been watching her, learning her weaknesses and using them against her. But who? The sound of her phone buzzing broke through her thoughts, and she glanced at the screen. Carter's name. She didn't hesitate. "Ava, we need to talk." Carter's voice came through the speaker, sharp and filled with the kind of gravity that made her stomach twist. "I've got the information we discussed. It's time you knew the whole story." Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this moment had been coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The flood of questions returned, pressing against her chest like a tidal wave. Who was behind it? What had they done? And most terrifying of all, what did they want? "I'll meet you in an hour," she said quickly, before the fear could take over. "I'll be at the office. Don't keep me waiting." Carter agreed and ended the call without further comment. Ava stood from the couch, her legs feeling like lead, and walked toward the window. The city lights below twinkled with an artificial brilliance, the streets alive with the hustle of thousands of people, all unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface of Ava's life. She hadn't been honest with herself, not completely. For so long, she had told herself that everything was about control, that control was what made her strong, made her untouchable. But tonight, standing here alone, she knew that wasn't true. She had let her walls come down, let someone in, and it had changed everything. Liam. Ava's heart clenched at the thought of him. He had been her anchor, her quiet strength when everything around her was crumbling. But as much as she wanted to give in to what she was feeling for him, wanted to believe that there could be a future beyond the boardrooms and the endless pressure, she knew it wasn't that simple. She couldn't afford to let anything distract her, not now. But could she keep him at arm's length? Could she continue to shut herself off from the only person who had ever seen her for who she truly was, not just the CEO, the powerful woman who controlled everything? The sound of the elevator arriving interrupted her thoughts. Carter had arrived. The office was empty when Ava arrived, the sleek, modern design of the space reflecting the cold, corporate world she had come to inhabit. She sat in the leather chair at the conference table, her hands gripping the edges tightly, her mind racing. She couldn't decide if she was ready to hear what Carter had to say, or if she was afraid it would destroy the last semblance of peace she had left. When Carter entered, his expression was grim. He set a manila folder down on the table between them, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've got the full report," he began, his voice steady but with an underlying tension. "I know you've been worried about who's been leaking information, who's been betraying you. But Ava, this is bigger than just a leak. This is a coordinated effort to take you down." Ava's heart pounded as she reached for the folder, her fingers trembling slightly. She opened it, her gaze scanning the pages quickly. The documents were filled with financial data, internal emails, and names. Names of people she trusted, people she had worked with for years. But one name stood out: Miranda Hawthorne. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Her sister. The woman who had always been there, the one who had pushed her to be the perfect CEO, to never show weakness. The one who had been so critical of her decisions, of her choices, of her personal life. "You're saying Miranda is behind this?" Ava's voice was barely a whisper, disbelief creeping into her words. "I don't know for sure yet," Carter replied, his tone softening. "But the evidence is damning. It's like she's been feeding information to the competition, undermining everything you've built, every decision you've made." Ava sat back in her chair, the weight of the revelation hitting her like a physical blow. She had trusted Miranda, despite everything, despite the pressure, despite the tension that had always existed between them. Miranda had always been the driving force behind the family business, the one who pushed for more, demanded perfection. Ava had admired her, even resented her at times, but never once had she suspected her of betrayal. The betrayal cut deeper than anything the outside world could do to her. It was her own flesh and blood, the one person she thought would always have her back, who had turned against her. "Why?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her throat tight. Why would she do this? Carter hesitated. "I don't know. But if we're going to stop her, we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more damage she can do. You're the one in control, Ava. You need to make a decision before it's too late." Ava's mind was spinning. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was at risk. And the person who had been the closest to her, the one who should have supported her, was the one pulling the strings from the inside. She could feel the walls closing in on her again, the pressure mounting. But this time, there was something different. Something had shifted inside her, a clarity that had been missing for so long. Ava took a deep breath, pushing the fear down. She wouldn't let Miranda or anyone take what was rightfully hers. Not without a fight. "I'll handle it," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "I'll take care of this." Carter nodded, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "Be careful, Ava. This goes deeper than you think." As he left, Ava was left alone with her thoughts, the storm inside her raging as she faced the most difficult decision of her life. She had lost so much already, but now she was about to lose the one thing she had always fought for, the legacy of her family, the company that had defined her existence. She wasn't sure how she would survive this, how she would ever come back from this betrayal. But one thing was certain. She would fight. For herself, for the company, and for the future she wanted to build. And maybe, just maybe, for the chance to build something with Liam. Someone who had shown her that she didn't have to carry it all alone. But first, she had to face the truth. Ava stared at the cold, sterile walls of her office, her gaze flicking over the stacks of reports and financial documents that had once been her entire world. The empire she had built, the legacy she had poured her heart and soul into, was crumbling before her eyes. But now, in the aftermath of Carter's revelations about Miranda, the sting of betrayal was sharper than the threat to her business. Miranda, her sister, her confidant, the one person who had always pushed her forward, had become the very thing Ava feared most, a shadow in her life, a hidden enemy with her own agenda. And yet, despite everything, Ava couldn't shake the lingering ache in her chest. She wanted to believe Miranda hadn't been involved in the sabotage, wanted to think there had to be some mistake. But the evidence was irrefutable. Her sister had betrayed her. The pain was deeper than any business loss. It wasn't just the money or the company at stake. It was the trust. The years of memories, the shared childhood, the long nights spent strategizing together. All of it had been poisoned by lies, by manipulation. And now Ava had to face it. The soft ding of her phone broke through her thoughts. A message from Liam. "Liam, I know you're busy, but I wanted to check in. I'm here when you're ready to talk. You don't have to do this alone." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had been avoiding him all day, consumed by the whirlwind of betrayal and corporate drama. But Liam's simple message reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. The warmth of someone who wasn't asking for anything, someone who wasn't judging her, someone who saw her, not as the CEO, not as the powerhouse, but as Ava. Ava's chest tightened. She had been running from her emotions, burying herself in the business because it was all she knew. But every time she tried to push Liam away, he kept returning, softly, gently, with understanding that was both a balm and a reminder that she didn't have to carry the world on her own. She let out a shaky breath and typed back. "Ava, I'm not sure what's next, but I'm starting to see that maybe I don't have to do it all alone. I'll be home in an hour. Can we talk?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself. For once, she wasn't trying to manage the situation, wasn't trying to control it. For once, she was allowing herself to trust someone else. The thought both terrified and liberated her. An hour later, Ava arrived home, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she still needed to make. As she stepped off the elevator and into her apartment, she saw Liam standing by the window, his silhouette framed by the city lights. He looked as steady as always, his presence a calm force in the storm that was raging within her. "Liam," she said softly, her voice a little shakier than she intended. "I didn't know where else to turn." He turned, his expression softening immediately. "Ava, you don't have to explain. I'm here." He crossed the room toward her, and for a moment she just stood there, letting the tension in her body dissolve with the simple act of his presence. The chaos of the past few days, the confrontation with Miranda, the shocking betrayal, the weight of her business, seemed to pause, just for this moment. "You don't know how much this means to me," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. The vulnerability in her voice surprised her, but she didn't pull away. For the first time in ages, she allowed herself to admit the depth of her need. Liam stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her face. His touch was warm, grounding, and Ava closed her eyes, letting herself lean into the comfort he offered. There was no judgment in him, no expectation, just the quiet support she had been craving without even realizing it. "You don't have to carry all of this alone, Ava," Liam said softly. "You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to fix everything by yourself." Ava opened her eyes and met his gaze, something in her breaking open. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "The company, the family, Miranda. I don't know how to rebuild after all of this. I don't know where to start." Liam's thumb brushed her cheek, his eyes filled with tenderness. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. You just have to take the first step. And that step doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be yours." Ava inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her chest. He was right. For too long, she had let the weight of others' expectations control her decisions. But in this moment, standing with Liam, she realized that she had the power to choose a different path, one that didn't depend on being everything to everyone. For the first time in what felt like years, Ava felt something stir inside her that wasn't tied to business, to wealth, or to success. It was a spark of something real, something human. It was hope. "I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect," she said, her voice quieter now, her hand reaching for his. "Trying to be everything I thought I was supposed to be. But maybe it's time I let go of the things that are holding me back. Let go of the idea that I can control everything." Liam gave her a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to do it all at once. Just take it one day at a time. You're stronger than you think." Ava squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of his words sink in. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It wasn't about the betrayal or the pressure from her family. It was about finding herself again, rediscovering the woman behind the title, behind the power and the wealth. "I'm ready to try," Ava whispered. Liam's eyes softened, and he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "I'm here, every step of the way." And in that moment, as Ava closed her eyes and allowed herself to finally relax into his arms, she felt something shift inside her. The road ahead was uncertain. There would be challenges, and there would be setbacks. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. Ava had a future to rebuild, not just for the company, but for herself. And with Liam by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The city skyline outside Ava's office was quiet this morning, a contrast to the relentless hustle that had once defined her every day. The lights of the buildings glittered like jewels, yet there was something different in the air. The weight that had burdened her for so long, of expectations, of betrayal, of control, seemed a little lighter today. She stood by the window, taking in the view, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, the steam rising gently in the quiet room. It had been 6 months since the storm had broken, 6 months since the betrayal of her sister, Miranda, had shaken everything Ava had believed about her family, about trust, and about the walls she had built to keep herself safe. Since then, she had made choices, hard choices about what mattered most in her life. Ava had faced the truth about her company, the sabotage that had been carefully orchestrated from within. It hadn't been easy to confront, to uproot the people she had trusted for years, to strip away the parts of her empire that had been corrupted. But she had done it, and in the process, she had found herself again. But the change didn't stop there. Ava had finally come to terms with the deep, aching loneliness that had defined her for so long. The quiet hours spent in boardrooms and offices, the empty nights spent in an apartment that was more of a fortress than a home. She had lived for the success of her company, yes, but she had almost forgotten the importance of the life beyond the numbers. Liam had been the catalyst for that change. In his gentle, unwavering way, he had shown her that she didn't have to sacrifice love for success, that she didn't have to be perfect. He had given her the space to be herself, to break down the walls she had built so carefully around her heart. And though it had been difficult at first, trust didn't come easily for someone who had spent years guarding her emotions. Ava had finally allowed herself to let go. He had been there for every step of her journey, standing beside her when the walls fell, when the dust settled. And now, standing in the quiet of her office, Ava knew that whatever happened next, it would be different. She had a future to look forward to, not just as a CEO, but as a woman who was whole again. The door opened, and Liam walked in, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. His presence in the room was as steady as always, his eyes meeting hers with warmth and a quiet affection that made her heart swell. "Good morning," he said, his voice a comforting melody in the stillness. "Good morning," Ava replied, a smile spreading across her face as she set the mug down and walked toward him. Liam had been her partner in every sense of the word, emotionally, physically, and professionally. Over the past few months, he had slowly become a permanent fixture in her life. They had navigated the ups and downs of their relationship, the balancing act between his role as her emotional anchor and her role as the CEO of a company in transition. But now, things felt different, more grounded, more real. "How's the board?" Liam asked, his tone teasing yet laced with genuine curiosity. Ava chuckled, the sound light and carefree. "Surprisingly quiet," she said, glancing out the window. "It's like they're holding their breath, waiting to see what I'll do next." "Well, what are you going to do next?" Liam asked, taking a step closer to her, his eyes searching hers, as though waiting for her to reveal the answer. Ava turned back to him, her gaze steady, no longer clouded by doubt. "I'm going to take this company in a new direction," she said, her voice filled with confidence. "Not just for the sake of power or wealth, but for something real, for the people who work here, for the values that matter, for the change I've been too afraid to make." Liam smiled, his pride in her radiating through his gaze. "And what about you, Ava? What's next for you?" Ava's heart fluttered at his words, the simplicity of the question grounding her. She had spent so long focused on them, the company, her family, her duties, that she had almost forgotten what it meant to focus on herself. But now, standing here with Liam, she realized that the life she had always wanted wasn't just about success. It was about balance, about having something beyond the boardrooms and the meetings, about having love and peace and joy. "I'm going to live," she said, her voice quiet but full of conviction. "I'm going to live for me. I'm going to make choices based on what I want, not on what others expect from me." Liam's smile widened as he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "That sounds perfect," he said softly, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. Ava's chest tightened with emotion as she looked up at him. There was so much she wanted to say, so many feelings she had kept hidden for so long. But in that moment, there were no words necessary. The connection between them was undeniable, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to explain herself. She didn't need to prove anything. "I never thought I could have both," Ava admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The career, the success, and the love, but you've shown me that it's possible." Liam leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a gentle kiss, soft and full of promise. "You deserve both, Ava, and I'll be here, with you, every step of the way." As the kiss deepened, the weight of the past seemed to fall away. There were no more shadows, no more walls, just the two of them, standing in the quiet of the room, ready to embrace the future. Ava had come so far, and the road ahead was still uncertain. There would be challenges, personal, professional, and emotional, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned that true success wasn't just about wealth or power. It was about finding balance, about letting go of the things that weighed her down, and allowing herself to build something real. With Liam by her side, she knew she could face anything. Together, they could navigate the complexities of her world. And together, they would create a life built not on expectations, but on love, trust, and the courage to embrace the future. The door to her office remained open, both literally and metaphorically. Whatever came next, she was ready, for herself, for the company, and for the love she had finally allowed herself to embrace. And that, Ava realized, was the greatest power of all.